This is Business Analysis Live. I'm Susan Moore, Community Engagement Manager here at IIBA.
And I'm Scott Bennett. I'm the Manager of Business Analysis here at IIBA. Today, we've got a great topic scheduled for you. We're talking about working with a data scientist.
And we've got a face that maybe you don't know yet, and that's Gary Edwards, Dr. Gary, or we call him Gary, the data guy. He's a data scientist. He's been working with us here at IIBA on some data projects. And we want to talk today about the role of business analysis and data scientist. And so we thought, who better to talk to than a data scientist?
That's right. And for those of you who are new to our LinkedIn Live, the purpose of these, excuse me, are to interact with you, the audience. So we're monitoring the chat. If you've got questions, please ask them. This is an opportunity to live ask us questions, and we've got an expert here, Gary. So Gary, why don't you give us a bit of your background?
Fantastic. Well, it's just such a pleasure to be here. So we've got a boutique consulting firm, Golfdale Consulting. Really, we're helping organizations with data-driven insights and communications to accelerate their business growth. Hands-on kind of executives, both my partner and I, doing research and market insights, building out analytic strategies, actually doing the analysis, which is where I like to get my hands out here, get my hands dirty on the data, and with that, providing executive advisory and advocacy. So really, we're helping with thought leadership and advocacy for some exceptional brands that include folks at the IIBA. My background varied, but always in and around data. I guess the highlights would be, I started as an analyst, still proud of that title, with doing epidemiology, actually. Everyone's an epidemiologist now, 2 years into the pandemic. So that's been, I want to say amusing, because nothing's amusing about it, but it's just been interesting to see that everyone now has this become kind of common vernacular. So that's where my career started. But then I went over to the commercial side, started as an analyst with the Gallup organization, the Gallup poll folks.
Okay.
Worked my way up, became the general manager, senior vice president at Gallup, running Gallup Canada. And then a couple other highlights. We helped Merritt's, which is a big research firm, develop their financial services research group, worked again hands-on with that. But then the big highlight then was we had a company in Pathka, kind of the combination of entrepreneurship with data, and helping multi-unit brands build their presence. We basically replaced mystery shop with customer experience management. We helped pioneer that space. Through that for over a decade. When we sold that company, I stuck around for a year and a half. I ran all the insights, which is my real passion, but also marketing and sales, customer success. And then started with my partner, whose real background is in advocacy, lobbying, highly regulated industry. My partner is my best friend, and she's also my wife. And we're just a couple of nerds who like to get our hands on data and evidence and help companies. So she's kind of the communications expert, navigating difficult waters, and I'm more the hands-on data analyst. I've had this, I've been so proud of my career all the way to the end. And now people ask me, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm a data analyst. Gave up all the titles. I'm like, I'm a data analyst. Data.
Yeah, that's right.
I get to do what I love. And so I'm just happily and humbly a data analyst. And so it's great to be here today.
That's awesome.
Give me the title data scientist. I'll take it. It's the new cool title. And I do a lot of data science. I think that though, if you ask me, what part of data science do you love? Well, I love the data analysis part. So There you go.
I think that's a question that I know I have heard people ask, and I think that's in organizations. I think that there is a little mystery about the difference between a data analyst and a data scientist. And I wonder if you can kind of break that down just real quickly. Like, what do you see? I mean, you think of yourself as a data analyst, but you've also got the chops to be a scientist. How do we distinguish those two roles?
First of all, it's okay that we can't always do that. So I think, we don't have to be, part of data science is, step one is just classification of objects or things or even abstract ideas like when you presented. And so these classifications are often messy with fuzzy boundaries. And I think definitely we have a fuzzy boundary here between a data analyst and a data scientist. The data scientist, I think, has to have the chops to go in and not necessarily being a data engineer, but to produce a framework that allows the data analysis to flourish. So they've got to know something about getting to the right data and piping it through and cleaning it all up. That gets you into the data analyst role, and then communicating it outwards as well. So there's a lot of overlap with data analysis, but where I think of data science as being so important is it's really just helping a data analyst get up to speed with all the modern, and I've had to do this, relearn myself, all of the techniques and the beautiful technologies we've got. You've got to keep up to speed on that. So all the open source stuff, got to get your hands dirty with SQL, with Python, with R, some combination thereof to be a good data scientist. You've got to understand data architecture, the data stack. And so this takes you kind of outside the realm of just being strictly a data analyst, because you've got to know a lot more about the context of data, would be my.
Yeah, and another element too is the statistical complexities too, right? A data analyst doesn't necessarily understand the statistical details, whereas a data scientist does do that. Is that right, Gary?
Yeah, I think that's a correct assumption too. But even for a data scientist, there are different. Some are great at the engineering part. My background, and I'm not a pure mathematician, but you know, the PhD and stuff. I mean, I've been an applied. I'm an applied social scientist. You know, if you looked at my core academic qualifications, then you know I focused on research methods. I focused on the application of advanced multivariate analysis, and then you know you start, if you're in the social science field, you start kind of mostly with surveys, but then you can expand that. You're like, well, if you keep your tools, if you keep up to date on the tools, and you keep up to date on modern technology, then you can start to apply those chops to a wider field. And so that's been my career. Like the work we did with you all, we weren't looking at survey data, we looked at all kinds of different ways people engage with the IIBA. And so for me, I'm really an applied statistician, if you will, as well. So that could be partly data analyst. Certainly you need those chops to be a data scientist, 100%.
So let me just share with the audience, we engaged Gary on a specific project we had. We were doing some member research, and we knew we wanted to reach out to members and understand what they valued and get really rich information on that. We do have a data analyst we work with on our team, but we got Gary involved in this to help direct us in terms of how do we get this research done in a way that doesn't have biases in it. It's open, it's giving us information that we're not leading ourselves to our own conclusion. And I found it interesting. Susan was on the project as well. I found it interesting working with Gary because we wanted to look at how do we slice and dice this data before we even ask the first question. How do we set up those questions in a way that they're not leading people to the conclusion we want them to? So Gary was instrumental in that, in terms of how do we set this whole research project up at the planning stage so that when we executed it, we were getting results that we could rely on and really understand in detail. Susan, your experience on that project, what did you think?
You know, I had never worked with a data scientist before working with Gary. So I wasn't, you know, I think it's a similar concern that many data analysts or business analysts who are working on data projects, I think it's a similar concern that they have. I've got this person who's really educated and skilled, and I'm in data, and I'm not really sure what I have to offer. But really what we ended up doing was we needed to provide the structure of the project. What was the problem that we were trying to solve, and identifying what are the segments of the audiences that we want to understand, and helping to put those parameters. And we did some of that research prior to even talking to Gary. And that I think was really interesting because it really cemented in my mind, gosh, you still have to do business analysis kinds of work in order to get ready for data projects, because Gary isn't going to know, you know, the problem we're solving and the segments and all of that stuff. So that was eye-opening, that part of the project.
Yeah, that's right. We do see a couple of hellos couple of hellos in the comments there from people. Please start asking your questions and we'll get to them shortly. Go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just going to say, you know, the very first job, and it's just, you either love it or hate it, but you know, the other part of me is just, you're a consultant, so you've got this, and this is for any aspiring data scientist or seasoned practitioner, is I think there's this requirement to be sort of boundary spanning. which is, once people put you in a box, you're like, okay, now I'm going to have to climb out of that box because I need to understand a lot of context to understand. Even when you carefully define a problem set, I need to understand, well, let's take a look at your data. And then, most data is not like pure data. It's proxies for something else. Like we observed that you're on a webinar today, but when did you sign in? When did you leave? Did you stay for the whole thing? It's not a single data point. It's a whole bunch of data points. And how involved were you with? Were you asking questions? Were you not? So even if we wanted to find out, well, how people are engaged on this webinar, it becomes a complex task. And so we have to start thinking about context of, well, why did people show up, or how did you invite them? And so we start looking at the priors, right? Like, what are the things you did to lead up to this? And then who came on that's already an engaged member, and who came on it's like, what the heck's this all about? And so you start looking at all these different contextual factors. And even for something as simple as, like, you think it's binary, like, did you show up or not? And you realize, no, there's probably 100 different ways that if we just want to spend the next 30 minutes brainstorming, we could slice and dice and build data around, are you engaged in this webinar? And so I think that's the fascinating part. And to me, it's this ability to sort of think big and then pull it in tight and say, okay, so this is what we're working with. These are the proxies we have for the things we can observe, like get inside somebody's head and see if you're really engaged or not. We're not the first to do this, so that's good news. There's lots of things. The other part about boundary spanning is you can say, well, this isn't exactly like this other thing I solved, and this is where humans are so much better than the machines, the machine learning, et cetera, is what humans have the capability to do that the machine can never do. Is we can say, we can deal with single instances. And this is really important, I think, because sometimes people are like, oh, I just want to see I want to see the machine learning algorithm. Well, before you do that, what humans are particularly good at is saying, this one thing is not the same as, kind of similar to that other thing I did once, or that I read about or studied. And even though it's not the same, I can make some adjustments to, quote unquote, the parameters. And now I have a viewpoint on it. So human beings are exceptional in, as these organic beings, that we can look at a single data point and still have insights, and contrast that with the machine, which is like, oh, the machine's better at everything. No, it's not. But like, yeah, if you got it to play 1 million chess games or 10 million, it's eventually going to be better than you. But I think that's what makes it fascinating, is that the boundary spanning part is so important for the data analyst role. Is you can look at that one thing you're trying to do, say, well, I've never done this before, but that's, as a human being, that's what intrigues you. Like, I think somebody else has done something else similar to this. I remember seeing something else. And so, like, you listen to people's narratives when they start a job. They're like, they'll, for the first year, you'll hear them repeating the phrase, oh, this is the way we used to do it. And it's helpful, can be annoying too. But the point is, somebody's trying to draw a connection with very small data points to figure out a course of action. And I think that's what a data analyst has to do.
We're starting to get some questions in. How about I pull a couple of questions in? Let's see. All right. So first question, who handles the data quality aspects of a project? And that is probably, it's probably looking for a particular answer, but my guess is it's not that simple. And I'm trying to think on our project, if we had data quality issues. I don't recall any of us being particularly like, oh, I'm the person that has to go solve that, because sometimes the problem to solve was context. How am I using this piece of data? But I don't know, Gary, how would you answer that question?
I think one of the first things you do is you expose truth. Oh, we have 10 years of data. I'm like, yeah, of course you do. How much of it is good? So I'm going to help you with your truth telling. So the last 3 years are really good because you upgraded your systems. That's fantastic. So I've got like data that's 3 to 10 years old. That's kind of interesting. Then I need to adjust everything because the last 3 years you upgraded your systems, and I've got pretty good data. And then you've got to plan to upgrade it one more time. And so it's going to be even better in the future. But that first part of truth telling is, we could call it data cleaning because it is, but just like, okay, this is what you claim to have. Well, we got 10 years of data. This is what you really got. Now let's take a look at it, because I'm not abandoning my post. I'm not throwing up my arms. I'm not frustrated. I know this going in. So just kind of everybody needs to chill a little. It's never as good as people claim, even in the biggest, boldest, best organizations. If you're in the biggest, boldest, best organization, it just means you've got so much more of it that's the mess you have to sort out. Or you can be in a tiny little startup and you're like, well, it looks like you got no data here, but somebody else has some data. So let's go to public, or you just start to have to get your hands dirty. But the first thing you have to do I think on the data cleaning side is some truth telling. Here's what I think you've got. Now, you told me you wanted to solve this. Here's the data we can look at. Can we agree that this will help us get an answer or a partial answer? It'll move us forward. If so, then we're good to go. But
yeah, I've recently been talking
responsibility. That's a shared responsibility.
Shared responsibility. I agree with you. I've recently been working with a few groups to understand the relationship between business analysis work, data analytics, and data scientists. The data analyst, to me, to answer this question about who's responsible for data quality, it's primarily the data analyst, but they can't work in isolation because they need help from the business analyst to put context around, well, what's this data mean? And perhaps from a data scientist too, in terms of looking at statistically, this number is really out of whack with industry or expectations. It is a collaborative thing, I believe, but I think it's primarily the data analyst that would be looking at that.
I think the data analyst looks at it and they have to solve for it, but don't do that. And I yearn for you to be successful. So to do that, learn how to have positive but uncomfortable conversations about what you've got. People need to hear it. And so the earlier you can service it, but you work in a business. Maybe it's a charity, or you work in an enterprise where hopefully they're asking you to do something because it has importance. And so just good business sense is, I don't like to surface a problem without having a solution. I don't want to be that person just like, this data's crap, or you can't solve this. Like, okay, we all know how to be a naysayer, but you were engaged to do something. So come up with some sort of solution. Say, well, this is what we can learn from what we've got.
So we're starting to get lots of really good questions today on data analysis. This is great. So next one, and because we have a lot, we'll try to keep these answers kind of tight. Okay, but this one I think is clearly for you, Gary. Do data scientists always have a statistical focus? Does the business analyst interpret the data for the business process? I've always used statistics. Well, let's answer the first part. Do data scientists always have a statistical focus?
Not all data scientists do. Some are just closer to, I think, a data engineer, which is they're surfacing the capability to get answers, but they don't have to be the answerer, if you will. And so I think the data analyst always has that role. I don't know, in my mind, it's all statistics. Even if you're just giving an observation of one, well, that's the observation of one. So I just think in statistical terms, we're all statisticians of a sort. What's the weather like next Thursday? Well, it's 50% chance of sunniness. Okay, there you are. So you're kind of a data scientist, aren't you?
Well, and I think the rest of this person's question is, could statistics be used by someone else? And I think your answer is, yeah, anyone on the team could have a statistical focus. It may not necessarily be the data scientist. But you also kind of answered another question, which is, what's the difference between a data scientist and a data engineer? So if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So again, I think we're all using statistics every day. So people talk about numeracy and building sort of data literacy. I think there's a great opportunity to learn some statistical literacy too, so that we can just all have a shared conversation and have our, be human and have our disagreements, but at least agree on a common language to have them. And that requires some statistical literacy. Well, then usually a data scientist would have a lot of it. A data analyst may have a lot or just some moderate amounts, but once you frame things up in terms of some sort of probabilistic outcome or description, then we're into statistics. The data engineer is going to play an important role in terms of being able to surface that data. Like there's a data stack of some kind, and the engineer has to be able to help us get to the numbers that we need, or the observations that we can turn into numbers so that we can have that, hopefully, not just data literate, but statistically literate conversation. So we can have our disagreements, so we can devise action plans, so we can see if things improve or stop unimproving. You know, we did some of my earlier work once we started consultancy was in the health and safety area. And it's funny because what you're putting on these great statistical models and you're just trying to prove something didn't happen, right? Because that's the goal. It's like your golf game. Like, no, I didn't. I got my numbers as low as I could, you know. So anyways, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, the data engineer really has to help with the data stack and making sure you can surface the right observations so that others can analyze it.
Yeah, I'm really seeing them as accountable for if there is a data architect or if there's a data scientist that has put together an architecture, the data engineer is really adding flesh to that skeleton that's been fleshed out by the data architect. So they are making it work, they're implementing it, and they're the ones that are, you know, I know that sometimes I've seen your SQL, it's incredible, but some of that I think is a data, would typically be a data engineer's role. And you know, we're getting, this is interesting because the questions that we're getting are related to distinctions in different job titles. Let me just give you some of the job titles that the audience is wanting more clarification on. And I think some of these get very blurred. So what's the difference? So what's the difference between a data analyst and a business analyst? What's the difference between a data analyst and a data modeler? What would be different about a product owner working with a data scientist? So I know there's a lot of different roles there. I don't know, Scott, if you want to tackle some of those, because you
Sure.
are the resident data analyst.
Yeah, so well, I'm the resident business analyst. So there's two of us that work on data analytics projects. We also have a data analyst. So in our organization, we've got 50, 60 people, 2 business analysis professionals and a data analyst. What I've found talking to other organizations about data analytics is if you're working in large organizations, let's say 1,000 people or more in the organization, you're going to have multiple different roles with specializations. So you most likely will have a data analyst, that's a base role. You're going to have a business analysis professional, base role. You might employ a data scientist, you might not. That might be a contract resources you bring in when you want. You might have an architect, you might have an engineer. So in a large organization, let's say a financial institution, you're going to have all these roles working together that specialize with deep knowledge because they've got such a prevalent need for those roles. If you're working in an organization that might have 30 to 40 people, it's likely just one person that has to figure all this stuff out. You know, where do you get your data from? How do you store it? How do you pull it out? How do you analyze it? So it really depends on the organization. And I don't want our conversation to confuse people that are working for small organizations. There are distinctions in those roles. The one question that I keyed in on here, being a product owner, what's the kind of skill set required to work with data science? I've made the transition from doing general business analysis to doing business data analytics. The one thing that I learned in making that transition is you need to understand the importance of making sure you get rid of any biases. It's very dangerous for people to come in with a bias thinking, you know, things should happen a certain way, and then people can find evidence to make that happen. When you're approaching questions that you're dealing with from stakeholders, you need to understand what the core problem is. If you understand the core problem in a non-biased way, you can find answers that will help them make decisions, make better decisions. But if bias sneaks in there, then what you're ending up doing is getting data that's supporting a biased decision, and it will skew things. So the key thing up front is understand this from the stakeholders, what's the problem you're trying to solve, make sure you're crisp, clear, unbiased there, and then you'll be set up to get data that will help your leadership team make better decisions.
As you were answering that, I know that we very often in these conversations, we get questions around what exactly does this role do? What is this role accountable for? And I think what we're seeing in the marketplace is that idea of a T-shaped skill set, so that it's less about the job title that you hold, and it's more about, are you really good in that long, you know, you have deep knowledge of things in the business analysis area, and then across the top of that T, you know, what are the areas where you're applying that, whether it's data modeling or data analysis or data analytics or business intelligence. And so it's less about what is the job title accountable for, and more about, you know, where do you need to apply, or where do you want to apply those skills? And
Yeah.
so I think that's really what's of interest to our audience today.
And
Let's
I
see.
think if I
Mhm.
just would offer one small comment, which
Yeah.
is the titles that can be very important. Very important. People begin their career and you want to see some title progression, right? But I think titles become important because it's a shortcut to know what you can ask of someone. Like, let's not forget that we all want bigger and better titles because we're ambitious and we're smart and we want to be better, and never abandon that. Those are good things. That's not a criticism. Those are good things. But the importance of a title should be that somebody doesn't know you from Adam or Eve or whatever the expression, they know what to ask of you. And so I think the business analyst is somebody, you know, when I hear that, it's like, oh, I've got a business problem and I need it framed and I need someone to figure this out for me. When I hear data analyst, I think that's a great title. It's a title I love. It kind of assumes somebody's figured out the context and they have a specific thing they want analyzed. So there's great overlap, but I think titles are very helpful for letting as shortcuts for letting others know what they can ask of us.
I think that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, because there is it in some ways it implies a little bit of a process that you might go through in a project. Where as I am getting closer to the solution, I might employ somebody like a data analyst, a data engineer, a data scientist, right? Because I know that the domain of the problem I've got to solve, it's data. But initially in that project, I may not know the domain or how I'm going to solve it. And I need that business analyst professional to help me. So I really like that answer. Well, here's an interesting question. Do certifications really justify skills in data analysis? Or, you know, is it just about getting your hands dirty rather than certifications? I know that's something we talk about frequently. Who would like to start the answer there?
So I'll respond to that one. So I've got my CBDA, certification in business data analytics. As someone who's been a professional business analysis in the business analysis field for over 20 years, I took the certification to understand more about data analytics. And certification, when I did a CBAP certification, it was sort of it was, I guess, giving me the stamp of approval that I knew what I was talking about. With this specialization, is what we call it, the certification in business data analytics, I really learned a new language. So the way I try to describe the role of a business analysis professional is you talk to business people in their language and understand them, and you talk to technical people in their language and you understand them. You're the communicator between the two. What I found the certification for me was I got a deeper, richer understanding of data analytics, so I can now speak that language. I can understand the type of things that Gary's talking to me about. I can understand the things that my data analysts are talking to me about. I understand the challenges of how to put together effective visuals to present information to stakeholders so they can make better decisions. So for me, it was a rich learning environment to learn that new language of how to communicate in this particular space in doing my job.
I think that's awesome. I just want to build on what you're saying, Scott.
Yeah.
So I think from the outside in, what we said about titles, it just expands on it, which is you don't know somebody, you see the title, then you see the certification, and it inspires some confidence. So you know more about this person than just their name. You see the title and then the certification, you're like, aha, I have a problem this person could help me with. So that's from the outside in, that's helpful. From the inside out, which is also what you're describing, is it puts you into a community with a common language. And I think that's really important, which is it's never a one and done. This is the great thing about being humans, is like We get together in communities that are now virtual, and and that's why I think the IIBA is so incredibly important, is your community is global. And you're like, but I need to find somebody just like me in Singapore and somebody in South Africa and these two people in the US. And we share a common sort of framework now that we can understand. We can also help each other. So inside out, I think it provides community that's so important for somebody with these certifications.
And speaking of our community, we have a members webinar coming up on this topic. You ready, Susan?
That's right. And that's, in fact, why we invited Gary today, because he's got a lot of stories that explain some of the projects that he's done. So, so next Wednesday, 12 o'clock Eastern, you can go out to IIBA.org to our webinars page and sign up for his webinar, Adventures in Data Analytics, because as you can tell, Gary has lots of adventures. He's been in a lot of different industries, and the stories, I got a preview of his talk, and it's pretty interesting. I think it's interesting in that he's taken data and has gotten insights about humans. That's actually the other really interesting thing I found about working with Gary, right? Because we weren't just pumping out reports. We were understanding things like motivations and value and perceived performance, which is fascinating to me because I think of myself as kind of a social scientist. So I do want to add one thing, because as you know, this is the great thing about working with Gary, is that the question that you ask is not where you're not going to get from Gary the answer you think you're going to get, but it's an even more interesting place to go. And that is this. We're talking about job titles and we're talking about certifications. And I think clearly what I heard both of you say is that certifications are not in lieu of experience. Like, really knowing your craft is a real thing. But the thing that I hadn't thought about was when you have a job title or you have a certification, it suddenly says something about what you do, what you're serious about. And that can be an identifier. That's really an interesting way to think about it. So thanks for that reframe. Well, let's see. I know, we still have more questions. Where do we want to go next, Scott? More questions or?
Well, we're at our 30-minute mark here.
We're a little over, yeah. All right.
Thank you for today.
Thank you. And like I said, Gary's going to come back next Wednesday, and we're doing a member webinar, Adventures in Data Analytics. You're going to hear more about his stories. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget, Wednesday, every other Wednesday, 10:30, we're here on LinkedIn Live, and you can now register in advance to join us. So we're so happy that you guys were with us. Take care.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll leave another one right here for you to help you in your business analysis career. If you haven't subscribed to the IIBA YouTube channel yet, you can click over here and click on the bell icon to get notified every time we publish a brand new video.